So I'm excited for Devin Townsend's latest album coming out in the end of this month, and to kind of bring up some buzz for me, I decided to look back at some of my favorite albums from him, and I decided to mirror pretty much how he released these two albums. He released Deconstruction and Ghost pretty much on the same day, and the two albums could not be any more different. So much like those albums, I decided to review both of them and release them on the same day. So hey, 2-for-1 deal, just for you. So let's dive into this particular album. Ghost by the Devin Townsend Project. So Devin Townsend has a very interesting history when it comes to releasing his music. Sometimes it's just been Devin Townsend, sometimes it's the Devin Townsend Project, sometimes it's even the Devin Townsend Band. Each one kind of has a different approach to how music is done. So this one is one of 4 albums that was originally kind of planned for this Devin Townsend Project. It has blossomed into, I think, 4 or 5, 6 albums. And Ghost is by far the most atmospheric and the most emotive of all the albums. And this was also how I was introduced to the band. This and Deconstruction were the 2 albums that I had been introduced to the band. So it really gave me a great idea of what this man has in store when it comes to producing music. Ghost is very acoustic, is another great word for it. The 2 main things leading this album through are the flute, helmed by Kat Epple, and I think that's Epple, E-P-P-L-E, Epple. Kind of like Apple, but with an E. And Devin Townsend's guitar work. Mainly the acoustic guitar. There's not a whole lot of electric guitar work on this album. The only real electric feels that we have on here are more of the keyboards and the synthesizers that are provided by Dave Young. And that's really the only real kind of synthesized sounds that are found on here. And that's kind of what I like. I like that it's very stripped down to kind of the core of what emotive that we're trying to feel within this. And so there's a few songs on here that are very, very standout, and some that I just love. Feather, Ghost, and Texada. So let's just talk about Feather for a moment, because I want to get this one out of the way a little bit first. It's the longest track at 11.5 minutes. I mean, the meat of this song is really in the first half, and this is where we have a lot of that overlay of vocals and Devin harmonizing with himself and harmonizing with the other vocalist of Katarina Natal, or Natalie? It might be Natalie. Really, I want to say it's Natalie, but I do know that it's Katrina. So like the 2 kind of harmonizing with one another, and I love how Devin overlays the vocals on this sense. Like, even though this album is a very acoustic album, in terms of the vocal work, there's a lot of overlay and a lot of studio manipulation in that sense. It's essentially like a wall of noise in an acoustic sense, which is really strange, and that's definitely found on Texada. That's where that wall of noise is just boom. Like, it really hits you hard, even though it's very light. But like the second half of Feather being that very like breath of air, and that's kind of what's felt on a lot of these other tracks. And this is very similar to those like really heavy and intense albums where if you're not in the mood for it, you're going to miss the train. And if you're not in the mood for Ghost, again, you're going to miss the train, because a lot of these songs, like the second half of Feather, where it's just very airy, and that goes into Kawaii. Like, these songs do ebb and flow and blend into one another very, very well, and there's not too much of a stretch of wandering without some kind of a perch to grab onto. The album does open up with just under 10 minutes of a little bit of a wander with Fly and Heart Baby. Fly is pretty simple and pretty nice, but it isn't until Feather that you get that first real oomph. And then the second half of Feather into Kawaii, finally you get Ghost, and Ghost is probably the most accessible of all the tracks on here. It's very singer-songwriter in that sense. I love how Devin uses all the ebb and flow. Like, that hook is so catchy, it stays in my head for days on end. But then we get into Blackberry and Monsoon, and a lot of these tracks do have a problem for me of being hard to differentiate between the 2. It's more of just an overall experience. Like, I couldn't really tell you what Blackberry and Monsoon sound like, but after Texada, the final 3 tracks of Seams, Infinite Oceans, and As You Were, these 3 tracks I think go on a little too far. I find like As You Were, even though it's a great closer, I feel like on this particular album, it does feel like I'm kind of done with the album after Seams. I think Seams is a great finishing mark, and then when they continue with Infinite Oceans, I'm like, okay, well, there's no real big moment that's after that. And As You Were does feel a little bit like Fly, so it does have a great kind of, closing at the end. But overall, I friggin' love this album. This is one of those albums that I need. This is one of those albums where after a really hard day, I don't want to necessarily be like punched in the face and like run through the grinder with a lot of these really intensive albums. I need something that's very light and very airy. A little bit of sophistication, a little bit of complexity still sprinkled in. Like, I don't want to just put on like relaxation best of like moods kind of an idea. I want something with a little bit of substance, a little bit of sophistication, and I feel Ghost is the perfect niche for that. It's really great to see that this album was paired very well with Deconstruction, because the two still sound like it's the same energy that's floating between the two. And I know that's probably something that I'll talk about or talked about in my Deconstruction review, where the two feel very, very similar in that sense. There's definitely a through line. And honestly, I listened to Ghost first and then go straight into Deconstruction. So yeah, that's pretty much it for Ghost. I love this album. I really, really do. And it's without a doubt that I love this album with my whole heart. It is one that I put on, even though there are some flaws, like it does go on for a little too long. I think they could probably shave this down to probably about 50 minutes or so. But I mean, I'm not going to shake a stick or demonize an album that I love with my whole heart. So that's about it for Ghost. Love it, love it, love it. If you haven't already watched my Deconstruction album review, check it out up there. I'll also have it in the end card. And yeah, that's about it. So thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, no time.